Hey guys, Bugcat7 here. Okay, it is Thursday, March 7th, 2024, and I'd like to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research 2 channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it, guys. Alright, well, in this video, I want to take a look at domestication of animals. And I'm sure you know something about the domestication of animals, but probably not as much as you think. And what do they know about it? That's what I'm interested in. And so there's several different theories about how the domestication of animals came about, but there's no concrete evidence of it that shows a progression to it at a certain time. It's going so far back in time, and there's so little evidence of that. So, it's hard for them to pinpoint. They'll say it's within a range of a couple thousand years. Well, that's a pretty much direct indication that the archaeological evidence can't seem to narrow it down to a certain time period, you see. And there are several theories about the domestication of the different animals and how that came about. And the first one being dogs from wolves. But there's no direct evidence of what converted dogs, from wolves into dogs. And genetically, dogs are almost identical to wolves, yet they don't look like wolves. So what's it all about? What's this all domestication all about? Because they're supposedly not a different species or anything like that, just maybe a subspecies or whatever. But that's what some taxonomists think anyway about dogs. But you can read about it in this Wikipedia thing here, and it talks about the different types of animals that we've domesticated, such as what they call the commensals, like the cats and dogs. Somehow, we over time had relationships with them because of their behavior, because of our behavior, blah blah blah. And again, there's theories about that. They say about wolves, that they were scavenging from the waste pile from human populations. But as we all know, going back in time, that the early humans used every bit of the animal. None of it was waste. It was against their customs, against their religions, etc., etc. So there wasn't much waste there for packs of wolves to feed off of. And secondly, wolves are dangerous, savage animals. You don't want them anywhere near children or people who are old people, or anybody who's infirm in any way. You wouldn't want that. So that doesn't make a lot of sense, how we developed a relationship because of scavenging. That's one theory. The other one is that we like pets, so we get like the pups or the kittens or whatever, and we like to keep them, and that's how eventually, raised by us, that their behavior would change, and we could pick the traits that we like best in them, etc., etc. So that's all great, except that there's no direct evidence of this sort of change coming, through archaeological evidence or anything like that. So they don't know that. So there's a lot of theories about the different domestic animals. So anyway, the commensals were them, and animals sought for food such as sheep, goats, and cattle, water buffalo, yak, pig, reindeer, llama, alpaca, and turkey. Target animals for draft and non-food resources: horse, donkey, camel, etc. Although zebras can't be domesticated, so for some reason they don't have the temperament or whatever it is. They're horse-like creatures, right? But for some reason they can't be domesticated, which seems rather odd to some scientists. But in any case, this article, it's very long. It's a very comprehensive look at the theories about domestication. And one of the features of the whole overall theory of the domestication theories that they have is this domestication syndrome. So let me just read this to you first, and we'll go to something else in a second. But domestication syndrome is a term often used to describe the suite of phenotypic traits arising during domestication that distinguish crops from their wild ancestors. The term is also applied to animals and includes increased docility and tameness, coat color changes, reductions in tooth size, changes in craniofacial morphology, alterations in ear and tail form, e.g. floppy ears, more frequent and non-seasonal estrus cycles, alterations and adrenocorticotropic hormone levels, changed concentrations of several neurotransmitters, prolongations in juvenile behavior, and reductions in both total brain size and of particular brain regions. Okay, so after all of this that they tried to correlate as common traits among domestic animals that have all these sorts of features that they just mentioned, and here's what they say at the end of this: the set of traits used to define the animal domestication syndrome is inconsistent. Okay, so they included that in there, but they're not telling you why it's inconsistent. So let's go to an article that might explain why this is. And before I even begin this article, the reason why I'm so interested in this is because of us, because of our species, because the varied types of phenotypes we have, morphology that we have, big, small, tall, all different types of shapes and sizes. And as I've gone over on this channel with other videos, previous videos, about how they think we're a hybrid, race from all sorts of humanoids of the past, and at least the ones that they know, the Denisovans and Neanderthals, that's the only ones they know about, and some of these other strange ones from around the world, small and tall, like the Adena and the Belbeaker people, and all this kind of stuff. Although we're the same species, it doesn't really jive up with species that we know that are all relatively the same size. So it just made me wonder about knowing about the current state of certain groups of humans on the planet. Okay, because we know they're pygmy people, right? They're all of a certain size. Okay, they are not considered dwarves, or little people, or midgets or anything like that. And I know they don't use those expressions anymore. They're not politically correct. But do you have those people, and you also have these people who are just like us anatomically, physiologically, all this kind of stuff, but they're just smaller in size, like some African tribes I've identified before on my other channel, my Stonewall Research channel, my original channel here. So I've gone over this, and the Watusi people, etc. So it's just interesting to me. And after hearing all the accounts of the giants, by the way, which you can find on my other channel, Stonewall Research channel here, the giants state by state, after reading all the accounts of the giants there, and their different forms and shapes, and extra teeth, and large craniums, and vaulted craniums, and elongated skulls, and all this kind of stuff. Okay, extra teeth, horns, double rows of teeth, spikes sticking out of their skeletal anatomy, extra spikes in their arms and legs, read about in there, all sorts of things with the skeletal anatomy of these giant humanoids that were found, plus as I said, like the Watusi people and the Pygmy people and these people who are anatomically like us but just smaller somehow in Africa there that I've gone over on the channel. So all these different human subspecies of today, I don't know what else you could call these people, but they can't explain the Frisians, etc. So, and also sort of inspired by Jenna at Cryptic Cryptids, and she just recently did a thing about Bigfoot. And I've always been thinking about this. I've been thinking about this whole question with domestication for a long time, and if it could be applied to humans, okay, with the all these domestic things that were supposedly developed in the past, and they have us believe all these things, especially about corn, that somebody was going to devote all their time and effort, in cultivating a crop of which there was practically no food yield whatsoever, but going to experiment with it for hundreds of years or however long it was going to take. And why aren't they repeating that experiment today? I kind of wonder that, why they're not repeating the experiment of corn today. New genetic data inspires rethinking of ancient corn domestication. Yeah. Well, what else are they rethinking now about domestication? Well, let me read to this article from Salon here. Scientists once thought they understood how domestication worked. Now they're not so sure. And how it applies to Bigfoot, in my opinion, okay, if they were playing around, because all these different sort of skeletal anatomies that I heard about in the accounts of the giants and what we know about present day human beings, okay, and in different shapes and sizes and all this kind of stuff, and what they say is gigantism and why that is, and acromegaly, etc. Every tall skeleton dug up from the past now has some form of gigantism. It's obvious that's the only explanation for it. Even though some of these skeletal remains, when they, like the Adena, for example, are just bigger bones, like the Belbeaker people, thicker bones. Where does that come from? You're not talking about people who are frail and tall. We're talking about people who are like Hercules, so. or Grendel or something like that. So what are we talking about here? So in any case, what do they really know about domestication? Let's talk about it a little bit here with this article here. Scientists once thought they understood how domestication worked. Now they're not so sure. Really? Okay. Let's see what they have to say about it. Though dogs are so close genetically to wolves that many taxonomists consider them to be a subspecies, most people wouldn't let a wolf lick their hand as readily as a Shih Tzu. When animals are domesticated, as the dog was, their traits change, and artificial selection occurs over many generations, which, in the case of the dog, probably happened through unconscious selection bias among ancient humans and their canid hangers-on. Okay, so unconsciously do it. So this is the current theories about it anyway, relative to that. Other animals, too, saw similar phenotype changes through the process of domestication. When wild boars were first domesticated in areas of both modern Turkey and China, the farmers who bred them preferred animals with less fur, more meat, and a tamer disposition. Similarly, a famous 2020 study on wild foxes in urban areas found that city-dwelling creatures had distinctly different physical traits, such as a noticeably shortened, wider snout, with a reduced maxillary jaw region, and with a brain case appeared to be smaller in the urban habitat, which suggested they were becoming semi-domesticated. Indeed, there are so many physical traits that humans observe as distinguishing domestic animals from wild ones that the process is sometimes called domestication syndrome, as famously laid out by Russian zoologist Dmitry Belyaev in the 1960s and 1970s during his silver fox experiments. Domestication syndrome posits that there are certain common physical traits that emerge among species as they get domesticated by humans. Yet, what if there was no pattern between which traits correspond with domestication? What if those alterations are in fact species specific, and arguments to the contrary are simply scientists succumbing to apophenia, a tendency to wrongly discern patterns in unrelated things? Question mark. Some researchers believe this may be the case, which in turn means we have been thinking about domestication all wrong. According to Dr. Gregor Larson, an archaeology professor at the University of Oxford, advocates of domestication syndrome simply have not provided enough evidence to support their theory. In 2020, he and several other scientists wrote a paper for the Journal in Ecology and Evolution called "The History of Farm Foxes Undermines the Animal Domestication Syndrome," that made precisely this point. It started by deconstructing Believ's famous experiment with farm foxes, the one that seemed to prove domestication theory. Believ found that after multiple generations of controlled breeding silver foxes on Prince Edward Island, the animals began to develop traits associated with domesticity: docility, floppy ears, spotted coats, and curled tails. Yet there are two problems with concluding that this proves domestication theory, as the 2020 paper pointed out. First, it ignores how Believ used foxes bought from a fur farm, who therefore may have already had pre-selected traits. Additionally, an analysis of the different domesticated animals does not show any consistent patterns in terms of evolutionary traits. So, an analysis of the different domesticated animals does not show any consistent patterns in terms of evolutionary traits. That's very interesting. These are the general categories of things that people have used to distinguish a domesticated animal from a wild animal, Larson told Salon. He pulled out a chart with a list of 9 domesticated animals: dogs, cats, goats, pigs, rabbits, rats, mice, foxes, and the original Russian farm foxes. These were then cross-referenced with traits associated with domestication, such as changes in their skeletons, coats, ears, tails, brain sizes, and seasonalities. When placed on a grid, it became patently obvious that no patterns existed. For example, on some occasions, both types of foxes, along with dogs, cats, and goats, experienced increased variation in their coat coloring due to domestication. But that did not happen all the time, and it was by far the most prevalent yes category for showing supposed signs of domestication syndrome, quote unquote. Quite often there was simply not enough data, and when it came to traits like skeletal changes and tail evolution, no meaningful trends or patterns existed at all. If there isn't a single trait that is common to all these different definitions, what is there? Larson's told Salon. If you don't have a single characteristic amongst 30 separate characteristics here, that is the same across 10 different separate definitions of it, what the hell is it? Everybody assumes they know what it is, but as soon as you start looking at it, it just vanishes before your fingertips. Catherine Lord, a postdoctoral associate in the Carlson Lab who works at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard, and whom Larson describes as brilliant, quote unquote, was instrumental in co-authoring the 2020 paper. She argued that their research undermined Believ's thesis, even though his experiment is still impressive. While Believ did indeed successfully select for increased tameability in his foxes, all the traits that supposedly came along with that selection previously existed in the population from Prince Edward Island decades before the experiment, Lord told Salon by email. Therefore, Believ's experiment, while still fantastically interesting for changes in tameability, does not provide support for the idea of the domestication syndrome. After all, Lord pointed out, there is no getting around the facts from their own paper. We found that none of the traits show up across the 7 very common domestic mammals we looked into, Lord wrote to Salon. In most cases where domestication syndrome traits were reported, they were appearing in specific modern breeds. The problem with this is that modern animal breeds only came into existence in the 19th century and are the result of selection on already domestic animals. So, can science definitively determine whether domestication syndrome is a real thing? Larson explained that the community must first come to a more concrete understanding of what it would actually look like. For now, it is more difficult to study domestication because the benchmarks can move around. Larson compared this to his experience working in a very difficult industry, music. I was kind of a consultant on the Pearl Jam film Pearl Jam 20 that came out in 2011, Larson recalled. There was a group of us then who were meeting, and one of the guys suggested that maybe what we should do is try and figure out how many live shows they've actually played, because it appeared to all of us said they might be getting close to 1,000 live shows. That seemed like a cool idea until the experts realized that live show, quote unquote, had a rather fluid definition. Very much like the domestication syndrome, you've got to define it, Larson recalled. Well, what constitutes a live show? Did the 3 songs on Saturday Night Live count? What about when they only played in front of small audiences? If they appeared on radio with only 2 members of the band, did that count? It's the same thing with how you define domestication syndrome, Larson told Salon. It definitely depends on what you're looking for and what you're counting. So all we are saying in that paper is that everybody has just assumed that it's a real thing, but nobody's actually gone through and tried to define it. If everybody had at first said, look, it's a thing, now we require an explanation to describe the thing that can work. But nobody ever actually tested whether or not this thing exists. So if the thing doesn't exist, why would you ever expect a single unifying cause for it? Even the one trait that seemed to be the most prevalent among all different types of domesticated animals, their tameability, becomes murkier when places in a scientific context. Increased tameability may be a common theme across domestic animals, Lloyd wrote, but the definition of domestication often includes increased tameability, so it is a bit of a circularity problem. We will only know if increased tameability is really a thing across domestic animals if we agree upon a definition of domestication that doesn't require it. Similarly, when trying to determine how animals are changed by humans, many definitions require human control, precluding our ability to study how much humans were actively involved in the process. There is increasing evidence to suggest that many domestic animals simply adapt to an environment we created, and that we may have rarely, if ever, had a direct, let alone intentional, hand in the process. Okay, so very interesting that what this lady here said from this institute here about increasing evidence suggests that many domestic animals simply adapted to an environment we created, and that we may have rarely, if ever, had direct, let alone intentional hand in the process. Okay, so just besides my interest in it overall as it applies to us, and how somewhere in the ancient past, when I think somebody was playing around with genetics, a more advanced civilization, as many people have suspected or hypothesized about in the past, whether it be Atlantis or Hyperborea or Lemuria, whatever it might be. Okay, some more advanced civilization, more technologically advanced civilization of the past, creating these things, because they just don't have any adequate explanations that they can pinpoint to any extent. Okay, where, you know, certain things may be good circumstantial evidence, but again, like this article says about this syndrome where you make patterns out of things that just don't exist. But since you're a pattern, your mind is a pattern creating machine, it just does this. But what she said at the end there, this Lord lady, about how, again, we're going to be like, we're accredited for domesticating animals, we domesticated animals, but this lady here is not saying that. This expert, all right, is saying that simply adapted to an environment we created and then rarely, if ever, had a direct effect on them, even not intentional at all. Okay, so what are we taking credit for of the past? Many, many things that we had nothing to do with as a hybrid species or subspecies or hybrid subspecies or whatever the heck we are, that we're so effed up with our genetics and everything. Okay, so again, the whole question of the domestication of animals and everything about it is just totally in question. They don't know. All right, so the fact that they don't know lends more credibility to my argument that somebody was playing around with something in the past. And when they have these big gaps in when they think the domestication of animals started, because they give a range. If you read more scholarly articles than I have, okay, then you'll read into these ranges, from 15,000 years ago to 8,000 years ago. Well, that's thousands of years. So that should be a direct indication to anybody who's thinking about this that they don't have enough archaeological evidence to pinpoint it down to a certain time period. Okay? So that totally makes it so little significance scientifically that it's completely unknown. All right, so all right, again, as I started this whole thing, I was saying, how does it apply to human beings? Okay, so being that we're sort of this amalgamation of all these hybrid species of the past and being a hybrid species ourselves, of all these humanoid creatures of the past, big and small and tall and short and little and all this kind of stuff, okay, where did this variation come from? In reading the accounts of the giants that were unearthed in certainly the states here, that I go over maybe 150, 200, almost 200 different accounts. I go through on my other channel, Stonewall Research channel, this whole playlist, giants state by state, all right, and all the accounts that I read on my other channel about the different types of strange configurations of these giant humanoids of the past, okay, and what we heard about from Cabeza de Vaca about what he witnessed here when he went through the southern part of the United States after being shipwrecked in Florida and making his way to the west coast through the bottom of the North America there, okay, and all the different weird humanoid tribes he saw there going through there who couldn't communicate with each other with all different languages and stuff like that. So again, if you have these big, small people, whatever, it just doesn't happen overnight. Just like the domestication of animals. Like, if they say the earliest domestication, known, they don't know exactly, but what they found is up to 15,000 years ago. Well, if they found 15, something leads up to that. So it's a long process that leads up to that. Well, beyond 15,000 years ago, I guess they don't know anything about that. Right? So it's just like, where the Belviger people came from and the Adena people or any of these small pygmy people or anybody, where's the history of their ancestry? What gave rise to them? What peoples or No idea. No idea whatsoever. Okay, so what do we know about domestication? Nothing. So, again, how it applies to people, and again, I'm just hinting at this, again, with Jenna from Cryptic Cryptids, okay, I was sort of hinting at the fact, because of, the what's said about Bigfoot, you have the group that thinks it's some sort of North American ape or something like that, and you have another group that thinks it's not an animal, it's more humanoid. And David Paulides had the research done. He had samples analyzed by a private laboratory. He had paid to have it done, and the DNA showed more human DNA in it and some unknown DNA and whatnot. He had it examined by PhDs and all that kind of stuff. So, all right, so if they're more human-like, all right, so, and where we come from some 200,000 years ago, just popping up, because they don't have any missing, there's the missing link, so they don't have the transitional period evidence and whatnot. So where we come from, where all these domestic animals come from, where all these different weird configured human beings come from different periods of time in the past, okay, unknown, okay, so maybe somebody was experimenting around, maybe like domestic animals, creating humans and humanoid creatures of every kind of variety, experimenting around with genetics, modifying themselves genetically, whatever it might have been in the past. This is what I think is probably happening based on what I've learned, about our weird species today. It's supposed to be the same species, all of us, but yet everything in the same species are all generally the same size. There's no exaggerated sizes and flocks of birds and fish and schools of fish, herds of cattle. There's no exaggerated sizes, within certain limits, yeah, but not like in the way it is in human beings. So I propose that, even Bigfoot is one of these either genetically modified organisms, was created, domesticated, made a domesticated creature, somehow domesticated, like where all these other domesticated animals come from. They serve all these functions and purposes for us. Well, apply that to humanoids of the past, of what we're an amalgamation of, all these hybrid species that, after how many cataclysms and everything, all history is all gone and forgotten about, and people wandering up among ruins that were created by some different peoples of the past, and we're attributing that to them and making all these wrong conclusions, in the past is completely different than we think. With more advanced technology, maybe things made like Duesenbergs back then, but who knows what trajectory societies would take as they got more advanced. It'd be like science fiction being like alternate worlds or whatever, and how different phenomena was used for technological devices of other kinds of societies that could have existed in the past, okay? If they think corn is some sort of domesticated plant that occurred some 8,000 or 9,000 years ago, well, you see, first it was in the highlands of Mexico. Then it got into it wasn't the highlands of Mexico where it was created. It was in the lowlands of Mexico. Now it's not in the lowlands of Mexico. Now it's somewhere in Peru and Bolivia and these other, Bolivia and other countries, in South America. So earlier than the Mexican corn phase of its own sort of domestication, ongoing process of domestication. This is what they say now. Okay, so again, whatever you heard about corn in the past in the highlands in Mexico, well, X, no good. Lowlands, nope, that's no good now, and who knows how many more revisions it's going to go under, okay? But certainly pointing to a more feasible explanation of somebody toying around with genetics in the past, just like we're doing right now. We're toying around with it, right? But see, no previously more advanced civilizations in the past. Where's the evidence of it? And even if you do find evidence of it, nobody's recognizing it in mainstream academics because they're told not to. You know, we're sticking to our story and that's it, because it's consensus science. We're going to all vote for our favorite theory, and they do that with everything, you know. But people might have equally just as meritorious theory, and just they don't like it because they don't like the guy. He didn't give them tickets to the ball game. He doesn't go out to dinner with them. Doesn't play golf with them. Who knows? You know, they're voting on their favorite theories, which are just stories made up by guys who are supposedly educated. Okay? They're voting on their favorite stories told about this stuff. You know? So, in any case, guys, think about it. Think about how it applies. And, you know, my theory, back to Bigfoot again, and we'll do like a separate video on it, because I was looking at Michigan, in northern Michigan forest, Bigfoot in the northern Michigan forest, especially on the peninsula there, where there's plenty of wild lands and very, very rough, densely forested wild lands on the northern peninsula there, where all these copper mines are, where the 500 million pounds of copper was dug up, that somehow they can't find any of it. You know, they find like a little bit of it, a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of it, but where did it all go? It had to go somewhere. And these big, giant, you know, ingots of it, you know, that weigh tons and stuff. Well, how are they moving that around? You know, they still won't know. But in any case, maybe certain types of humanoid creatures, especially big ones, I keep on saying the giant humanoids of the past were the ones moving around these giant blocks of stone a lot easier than we could, no matter what size they were. I showed you moving stuff around with slings. Well, we're just as intelligent as we always were. Who's saying they used slings in the past? But they were 12 feet tall and weighed 2,000 pounds. See, then you're throwing around big giant blocks of stuff all over the place. A lot easier than hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of our average sized people could. Building ramps and sleds and all kinds of cockamamie things, cranes and this and that and the other thing. Maybe that's how we accomplish some stuff later on, trying to figure out how they did it and all kind of stuff, but within certain limitations too. It seems, as opposed to these people in the past dragging 400-ton blocks up mountains and stuff like that. You know. So in any case, you know, that's why I think Bigfoot could be one of these things that was domesticated, a humanoid creature that was domesticated to work in the mines, to mine the copper down there. They got fur, they're nice and warm down there where it's 52 degrees underground, if you know anything about it. Everywhere underground, in all the cave systems that you ever been in and all kind of stuff. Howie's Cavern right up here in New York, which I've been to. Okay, it's 52 degrees down there. If you start the tour without some sort of jacket or whatever, you're going to be freezing by the end in a t-shirt. I'm here to tell you that's what happened. So it's 52 degrees underground, so that's, you know, they got hair and all that, and they're strong as could be, strong like Hercules, okay, and just intelligent enough to give orders to or whatever by other giant humanoids, maybe ones that are bigger than them, you see. So I don't know, I'm trying to give an explanation. It seems to me like it could be that human beings in the past were either genetically modified somehow or created somehow and toying with all sorts of genetics in the past, and modifying themselves, domesticating others. This is the kind of things that would go in the past. We did it with animals. Why not with human beings? Think about it. These are what all these people, these famous writers are talking about, like Andrew Collins and the people on Gaia there and all these experts, and you know the ones I'm talking about, all these guys who go on coast to coast to get a place, Michael Tellinger, you know, they can talk all about these fantasy stories and all kind of stuff. I'm trying to give you the truth here on this channel, folks. We're trying to figure out the history of the past through the giants and other humanoids and whatever it is. Okay, but they're not giving the truth. They're sensationalizing certain ideas about the giants that just simply aren't true. Okay, we're trying to get to the bottom of it here. And even they assume certain things from the past. Just like, you know, all these articles assume certain things. And certainly this one here on Wikipedia doesn't consider anything that I just read you out of this article from, what is it, 2022? Or 2023? Something like that. 2023, April 26, 2023. All right? Now they're not so sure. Okay, so think about it. Okay? More to the side that I'm talking about, something else went on in the past. That domesticated animals and all these weird humanoids wandering around the planet and other plant species and other strange things that don't make any sense. Okay, one day I'll get in my hand on some William Corliss books and we'll take a look at them and see what they have to say. Okay, and what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. To some guy who's just an expert scientist on so many fields, you know, worked for the U.S. government at one time. Now nobody wants to know him. But in any case, think about this article, folks, and think about what I said about everything, including Bigfoot. Okay, maybe these creatures were engineered or domesticated to do this certain task, and you know, maybe even we were to be the companions, or, you know, more sort of like, you know, domestic workers in households or something like that. It almost seems to be like all the Egyptian renderings of the ruling class and the little people working around them everywhere there, and certainly the way it was with the Watusi in modern times that we know about. Why should that be such a foreign idea to anybody? That we might have been, you know, subjugate at one time to, you know, larger humanoids of the past. That's where all these bad stories come from. Maybe some of them weren't so nice, but it seems that whenever we talk about the giants, they're nice and passed on all these great things, like what the Iroquois and the Haudenosaunee got from the big man, who's probably Nadina. All right, more advanced, more sophisticated, knew about engineering, knew about art, pottery making, metallurgy, blah, 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 blah. Okay, while we were picking our belly button lint and wiping our rear ends with leaves, I guess, or whatever. All right, that's what they say. All right, but there's a bigger story here and a much more involved story, you know, even that about us ourselves, and it probably wasn't what was going on in the past, but we don't know what was going on in the past. We're trying to get at it here, but you're surely never going to find any of that stuff out if you're listening to these guys on Coast to Coast or here or whatever. It was sensationally all kinds of misinformation about the giants. That always was misinformation about the giants, because that's what we do as humans from a psychological aspect. All right, it's not so difficult to understand once you understand and admit to our own nature, which every war has its propaganda and all kind of stuff, and you're experiencing it now. We're a warlike nation, we're a war-based economy and all kind of stuff. That's what Eisenhower is talking about. But in any case, guys, think about this stuff. Think about what I said. You can certainly read all these things if you want, the whole thing on the domestication of animals here in Wikipedia. It's very comprehensive, huge, long article. I read it all. All right. There's all these theories about anything, but they just don't know. And now it's just confirmation, they just don't know at all. All right? Which lends more credence to my hypothesis about it. All right? Anyway, guys, think about it. Please do hit the like button. Please subscribe if you're not a subscriber. And be back soon with another video. Bugcat7 signing off. Peace.